But for now, a very important interview, and questions around whether you've actually thought about B-BBEE and disability, and that it could in fact be a formula for discrimination and segregation. Are you aware that companies would use ways to receive disability scorecards, but the majority of disabled people still sit unemployed? And finally, that the non-inclusion of people with disabilities in the workplace could actually be the new apartheid, or if nothing else is done, where do we take this from here? And these are just some of the sentiments of our next guest, Beth Cook, the CEO of Progression, which is an agency specifically set up to find work for people with disabilities. And we welcome now Beth. Thanks so much for speaking to us here on Morning Live.
Morning, thank you very much.
Now, Beth, as your company is in quite an unusual position where you actually work with people with disabilities and trying to get placement for them, please briefly explain to us what Progression actually does in this regard to find those positions for people with disabilities.
We primarily work in the skills development space, training people with disabilities with relevant skills to enter into the workplace, into permanent employment. So as far as the B-BBEE scorecard is concerned, we work in the skills development element, the employment equity elements, enterprise development elements, all leading to hopefully employment with people with disabilities.
Now, Beth, I see you and your colleagues are of the opinion that the B-BBEE disability could in fact now be a formula for discrimination and segregation. Why does Progression have that particular sentiment? And could it be that perhaps your company needs to find better ways of getting people employed, some would say, instead of using that? But let's engage on that particular point.
Well, we've been around for about 18 years, and in those 18 years, we've seen a definite change in the way corporate South Africa are engaging with people with disabilities and their commitment to employing people with disabilities. So B-BBEE, the spirit of B-BBEE is to create transformation. What we are seeing a lot of in recent times is that it's become a checkbox exercise, and corporates are asking us, one of the things that we get a lot of is that, can we please have 20 people with disabilities on a learnership? We don't want them hosted in our workspace. Can you find alternative workplace experience for them? And then can you guarantee employment for them, but not with us? So if you take that into account, you can see that the commitment isn't to employing the person with a disability. The commitment is to achieving a checkbox exercise to maximize your points on the B-BBEE scorecard. And people with disabilities, there are bonus points for including people with disabilities into your scorecard through learnership, through employment equity, but they're only on your employment equity for the period of the 12 months. So I think it's a checkbox exercise. It's not buy into the spirit of what the Act is trying to achieve.
And that, of course, is a huge problem, Beth. But perverse as it may sound, that companies can actually use disabilities, people with disabilities, as ways to receive, better points on their scorecard. People with disabilities are still, by and large, unemployed. So what
Absolutely.
seems to be the problem there?
Okay, so what happens is people with disabilities are in demand for skills development. So our employers are rotating learners on different learnerships to get the points for skills development, but there's not enough emphasis on employing people with disabilities on the B-BBEE scorecard. So the spirit of transformation is not being met. The other thing is that I think the impression out there is that employing people with disabilities is cumbersome, it's hard, it takes time, it takes energy, and yes, it does. But if you do it correctly, from day one, it's actually as easy as employing anybody else if it becomes a part of your internal processes and procedures. And we don't see that. It's one of the services that we offer is let us help you write up your policies and procedures that are inclusive. Yet we're still seeing individuals or corporate South Africa segregating people with disabilities even through skills development initiatives. So they come to us and say, we want a group of only people with disabilities and we want to achieve our maximum points with that group of people with disabilities and we don't want them in our space. So we're not creating awareness. If a person with a disability is through a learnership, for example, through as a skills development initiative, is employed into your workplace from day one, you're creating awareness and you're creating an environment that is inclusive, but that's not happening.
And just a few points there, because firstly, as you say, even though people with disabilities are offered these learnerships, they are seldom retained or employed into these positions after the fact. But why would companies then go through this process and not see the value in employing people afterwards?
Well, number one, they're not experiencing the person in the workplace. 50% prior to lockdown, 50% of employers were asking us for hosted learnerships. So a hosted learnership is where the learner is not hosted by the employer who's funding the learnership. They're hosted in an alternative workspace. So that's the number one. Number two is that you must remember that as a majority of South Africans, we are experiencing levels of poor education, and people with disabilities themselves have a poor level of education coming into the marketplace. So they don't meet the entry-level requirements for higher level qualifications in general. I'm not saying that there are not people with disabilities out there that can be employed into the workplace straight away, but the majority, as is the majority of South African unemployed individuals, the education is poor. They're coming into the marketplace with a lack of skills. So BEE has been around since 2007, and if since 2007 until now, that's 13 years, we had invested in long-term initiatives for people with disabilities, for any disadvantaged South African, we would have seen a change. But that hasn't been the case. It's always been a checkbox initiative. I think corporate South Africa see BEE as a tax and a grudge purchase. It's a quick fix. It's to get the points today. It's not about tomorrow. We often talk to our clients about invest in an individual for 5 years and see the difference that individual has achieved, the transformation for that individual, and you'll find a person that will be able to enter your labour market, into your employment with the necessary skills. But there's no commitment to a long-term investment in transformation. It's all about the here and the now. What can we get today?
And you talk about that investment and the transformation, the benefit that could be derived by companies. And I'm just wondering, what do we need to do to change the sentiment and the perspective of companies on this? Because I'm immediately reminded of a colleague here at SABC News, Radio News, Rulani Baloy. And it's an absolute pleasure having her in the workspace because she's blind, but everything is set up for her. And, she's like this recorder, because I think because of the sensors compensating for sensors that she doesn't have, she remembers everything. She remembers sounds, and when you want to hear something, when you forget something, you ask Rulani, and she's just brought such a light into our newsroom. So how do we change companies' perspective to show them how rich it could be, including people who are differently abled?
Look, you need buy-in from the top down. So if a CEO of an organization buys into transformation for every single person in South Africa and want to implement something that makes true that is true transformation, and they buy into the spirits of BEE, and that filters down into the rest of the organization through awareness programs, through changing your policies and procedures, to engaging with people with disabilities on a regular basis, to giving them opportunity to, that's how it's going to change. It's not going to change unless there's buy-in. And just to open up your mind to the possibility that people with disabilities have the same needs, wants, and desires as anybody else, and they should be economically active. They have the right to be economically active. Why shouldn't they? They have the right to experience the workplace as anybody else does. So that's, yeah. Also, I think corporates need to be a little bit more creative in assisting people with disabilities. So I understand a lot of companies have got headcount freezes, or the economy hasn't been great in South Africa. So spending money on people with disabilities has to make sense at a business level. So if you can't absorb people with disabilities into your own organization, then invest in them in terms of setting up their own businesses through your enterprise development spend and your supplier development spend, which are two other elements on the scorecard. So you are able to, if you want to call it that, kill two birds with one stone from an investment perspective, and you'll get the BE points. But at the same time, you're buying into transformation. You're buying into developing people who are the most disadvantaged group in South Africa are people with disabilities, and especially people of colour who have a disability. They are the worst affected in our economy and in our country. They are affected from an education perspective. They are excluded socially. They desperately need assistance. And I know a lot of corporate South Africans think that it's not our responsibility, it's government's responsibility. But I believe in good corporate citizenship. I believe that if we change the attitude as individuals, we should all be invested in every single South African, in doing what we can, in using the Employment Equity Act, the Skills Development Act, BEE, to transform South Africa.
Absolutely. Beth, thank you so much for engaging us this morning. Beth Cook is the CEO of Progression, and they are an agency specifically set up to find work for people with disabilities, and just sharing some of their concerns regarding the difficulties, especially in finding long-term employment for their clients. And, we unfortunately had to wrap that interview, but an interesting thing that Beth says is that up to 30% of the people with disabilities that interview do not actually have a disability, but that they have a doctor's letter stating that they have a disability. Very, very interesting conversation, Leanne. So much more to touch on there, but yeah, in the interest of time, we had to stop.
Unfortunately. All right, well, I think that's where we have to leave it for this morning. All right, thank you very, very much, everybody.